Jack the Ripper in London pubs, D.B. Cooper in the deep woods, and a hollow ghost town. Today, I'll tell you 20 stories of people and shadows dissolved into history. By the way, we're really curious. Where in the world are you watching us from? Let us know your city or country in the comments. Let's go! The air in the hallway is so thick with the smell of damp stone and old fear that you can almost taste it. Imagine walking through a corridor built for 200 people, but finding yourself pushed against the walls by the weight of 2,400 souls. In 1924, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum didn't just break the rules of medicine, it broke the people inside, turning a grand stone fortress into a massive, echoing tomb for the living. The mystery began when the screams changed. It wasn't just the patients anymore. Doctors and nurses started reporting a rhythmic, metallic scratching coming from inside the thick masonry. They called it the cries from the walls. It was as if the building itself had developed a voice, absorbing the trauma of thousands of people locked in lightless cages or roped to basement floors. By the time the sun set over West Virginia, the hospital became a labyrinth where the shadows seemed to have more substance than the patients. The intrigue lies in the brutal treatments that fueled the madness. This was a place of ice-pick lobotomies performed in dark hallways and experimental shocks that left the air smelling of ozone and burnt hair. In 1924, it became a sovereign territory of pain. When the facility finally shut down, investigators found something chilling. Deep scratches on the inside of sealed, windowless rooms where no one was supposed to be, and bloodstains that modern chemicals still can't scrub away. The climax of the asylum's dark history is the presence of Ruth, a patient whose rage was so intense it supposedly outlived her body. Even today, heavy iron doors slam shut by themselves, and thermal cameras catch human-shaped heat signatures pacing in areas that have been locked for decades. To this day, Trans-Allegheny remains a terrifying reminder. Some places don't just house history, they trap it, forcing the screams of the past to echo forever in the cold, silent stone.
Imagine a castle where the walls are so saturated with suffering that they have literally dripped with it for 8 centuries. This is not just a castle in Northumberland. This is Chillingham, the most haunted fortress in Great Britain. Here, silence doesn't bring peace, it makes you listen to what is happening behind the masonry, where for hundreds of years, torture was an official craft. The mystery of Chillingham began in the dark times of the Border Wars. The main protagonist of this nightmare was John Sage, an executioner who tortured thousands of people in the castle's dungeons in just 3 years. His innovations in the art of pain were so horrific that even 700 years later, visitors report the heavy scent of stale blood in the torture chamber. The intrigue lies in the fact that in Chillingham, ghosts are not just legends for tourists, but physically tangible anomalies. The most famous of them, the Blue Boy, terrified guests for decades with flashes of blue light and heart-wrenching screams from behind a bedroom wall. The most chilling discovery occurred during the castle's restoration. When workers opened a wall in the Pink Room, they discovered the skeletons of a man and a small boy. The child's bones were deformed. He had clearly tried to claw his way out of the stone prison from the inside until he died of starvation. From the moment their remains were buried, the Blue Boy stopped screaming, but the castle did not go quiet. His place was taken by the White Lady, begging for water, and shadows in the corridors that seemed to still be waiting for the executioner's order. The climax of Chillingham is its immutability. This place doesn't try to seem friendly. It remains a stark monument to an era when human life was worth less than the stone from which these walls were built. Even the most hardened skeptics leave with the same feeling. In Chillingham, you are never alone. You are always being watched by the thousands of eyes of those who remained forever imprisoned within these cold, roofless walls.
The forest near the NATO air bases at Bentwaters and Woodbridge usually slept in a heavy, cold silence, broken only by the hum of military patrols. But in late December 1980, that silence was shattered by an event so classified and so bizarre that it is still whispered about in the halls of intelligence agencies today. Imagine being a highly trained military security officer, armed and prepared for a Soviet invasion, only to find yourself standing face to face with a craft that looked like it had dropped straight out of another dimension. The mystery began in the early hours of December 26th, when security patrols saw strange glowing lights descending into Rendlesham Forest. Expecting a downed aircraft, Sergeant Jim Peniston and his team moved into the trees. What they found was not a crash, but a triangular craft pulsing with a mesmerizing light. Peniston claimed he got close enough to touch it, describing a warm surface etched with strange, hieroglyphic-like symbols. In that moment, he felt a data dump, a blinding flash of binary code that would haunt his mind for decades. The intrigue exploded 2 nights later. This time, the Deputy Base Commander, Colonel Charles Halt, went out himself to debunk the hallucinations. Armed with a pocket tape recorder, he captured the pure, unscripted shock of military men as they watched multiple glowing objects maneuver through the canopy with impossible agility. They tracked a red, sun-like light that darted between the trees, eventually firing a beam of concentrated light down into the base's nuclear weapon storage areas. The recording is a chilling document of cold professional soldiers losing their grip on what they believed was possible. The climax of the Rendlesham incident is the physical evidence left behind. The next morning, investigators found 3 perfectly symmetrical depressions in the frozen ground and radiation readings that spiked 10 times higher than the background levels. Despite official attempts to explain it away as a nearby lighthouse, the facts don't align. Lighthouses don't leave landing gear imprints, and they certainly don't trigger radiation alarms in the middle of a forest. To this day, Rendlesham remains a jagged tear in the fabric of military history, a night when the defenders of the West realized that the most profound threat wasn't coming from across the Iron Curtain, but from somewhere far beyond it. Imagine a police report that doesn't detail a burglary or a domestic dispute, but describes a child walking backward up a wall in defiance of gravity. This isn't a discarded script for a Hollywood horror film. It is the official record of the Gary, Indiana Police Department from 2012. In a small, unremarkable rental house, a family found themselves at the center of a spiritual war so violent that even the most hardened city officials were left trembling. The mystery began when LaToya Ammons and her 3 children moved into the house on Carolina Street. Almost immediately, the air turned cold, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the basement. But things escalated far beyond simple hauntings. LaToya's children began to speak in deep, guttural voices that weren't their own. Their eyes would bulge, and they would be thrown across rooms by invisible hands. When a social worker and a nurse visited to investigate claims of child abuse, they witnessed the impossible. LaToya's 9-year-old son glided backward up a wall and onto the ceiling, smiling at them the entire time. The intrigue deepened when the authorities got involved. Usually, police are the ultimate skeptics, but Gary Police Captain Charles Austin, a 36-year veteran, became a believer after visiting the home. He reported that his radio malfunctioned, lights flickered, and he captured a photo of a shadowy figure standing in the window of the empty house. The official police report is a surreal document filled with accounts of demonic presences and unexplainable physical phenomena. A local priest was eventually called in to perform a series of intense exorcisms, claiming the house was a portal to hell inhabited by over 200 distinct entities. The climax of the Demon House saga is the lingering scar it left on the community. The house became so infamous that paranormal investigator Zach Baggins eventually bought it and had it demolished, claiming the energy inside was too dangerous to remain standing. But even with the house gone, the official records remain, a chilling collection of testimonies from police officers, doctors, and social workers who all stepped into 3221 Carolina Street as skeptics and walked out as witnesses to something that modern science refuses to acknowledge. Deep beneath the bustling pavements of Scotland's capital lies a dark subterranean mirror of the world above. Built in the late 18th century as storage for merchants, the South Bridge vaults were quickly abandoned due to flooding and toxic dampness. But the vacuum of the underground didn't stay empty for long. As the city above flourished, the vaults became a lawless, lightless slum for those the world wanted to forget, and some say they never truly left. The mystery of the vaults is rooted in the sheer desperation of their inhabitants. For decades, thousands of people lived in total darkness, breathing stagnant air and dying in silence. When the chambers were finally rediscovered in the 1980s, archaeologists didn't just find artifacts, they found a preserved nightmare. Children's toys, rusted tools, and plates with food scraps sat exactly where they had been dropped, as if the entire population had vanished in a single panicked heartbeat. Yet the most unsettling finds are the nests of the shadow dwellers, areas where modern explorers find fresh evidence of habitation in tunnels that have been officially sealed for years. The intrigue lies in the psychological weight of the stone itself. Those who enter the vaults today report an overwhelming feeling of being watched by something that moves just beyond the reach of a flashlight. The most infamous entity is Mr. Boots, a tall figure in heavy leather footwear whose footsteps echo through the chambers even when no one is moving. Skeptics point to the lack of ventilation causing hallucinations, but they cannot explain the physical scratches left on visitors or the unexplained thermal drops that turn the air into ice within seconds. The climax of the Edinburgh Vaults is the chilling realization that the underground is a living archive of human misery. In the deepest sections, the silence is so absolute that you can hear the pulse in your own ears, until it's joined by the sound of a second, rhythmic breathing that doesn't belong to you. To this day, the vaults serve as a reminder that every great city is built on a foundation of secrets, and in the dark corners of Edinburgh, those secrets still have a heartbeat. In 1940, the quiet fishing town at the tip of Cape Cod collided with what local newspapers dubbed the Black Flash. It wasn't a common criminal or a wild animal. Residents of Provincetown described something tall, draped in a long black cloak with its face hidden by a silver mask or a deep hood. It didn't just ambush people, it displayed physical abilities that defied human anatomy. The mystery began with a series of reports from children and teenagers who swore they saw a black man jumping over high fences and garages in a single bound. Soon, the situation turned dangerous. The entity began stalking adults, cornering them in dead ends, and emitting a chilling, metallic laugh. Witnesses described its leaps as flight. The Black Flash could launch itself 10 feet into the air from a standing start, easily clearing obstacles that would stop any athlete. The intrigue spiked in October 1940 when 4 teenagers were cornered by the entity on school grounds. When they tried to fight back, the Flash emitted a cloud of blue flame from its hands or mouth and vanished into the darkness, simply vaulting over a 10-foot wall. The police, initially skeptical, were forced to patrol the streets with loaded shotguns, and groups of armed volunteers scoured the dunes. However, every time the hunters thought they had trapped the creature, it made its impossible leap and literally dissolved into the night. The climax of this urban legend came as abruptly as it began. After several weeks of terror, the sightings stopped.
Was it mass hysteria, an eccentric prankster with spring-loaded boots, or something that had been hiding in the Cape Cod dunes for centuries? One fact remains. The records in the Provincetown police archives still hold the testimonies of sober, terrified witnesses who saw a black silhouette soar over the rooftops in the dead of night, leaving behind only the echo of its unnatural laughter. In the heart of Spitalfields, London, stands a tavern that hasn't changed its shadow in over a century. The 10 Bells is more than just a historic pub. It is a grim link to the autumn of 1888, the season when Jack the Ripper turned the fog-choked streets of Whitechapel into a slaughterhouse. This was the place where the killer's victims spent their final, desperate hours, and many believe the atmosphere of those nights was permanently absorbed by the pub's Victorian tiles. The mystery of the 10 Bells is inseparable from the faces of Annie Chapman and Mary Jane Kelly. Both women were frequenters of the establishment, and it was from these very doors that they stepped out into the night to meet their horrific ends. For decades, staff and patrons have reported an oppressive, heavy energy that clings to the upper floors, areas that were once tenements where the victims lived. The most persistent report involves the feeling of a presence standing directly behind you, only for the mirror to reveal an empty room. The intrigue took a scientific turn in recent years with the recording of unexplained acoustic anomalies. Professional paranormal investigators and casual tourists alike have captured EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, in the cellar and the stairwells. These aren't just random noises, they are described as rhythmic, heavy footsteps echoing on wooden floorboards that were replaced by stone long ago, and whispers of names that correspond to the Ripper's victims. In one famous instance, a tenant refused to sleep in the upper rooms because of the sound of a phantom struggle that repeated every night at the same hour. The climax of the 10 Bells legend is the shaking of the building's history. In the 1970s, the pub was briefly renamed Jack the Ripper, but the name was changed back following public outcry and a series of unexplained misfortunes that befell the owners. To this day, the pub remains a chilling site of pilgrimage. Whether it is the residual trauma of 1888 or something more sentient, the 10 Bells serves as a reminder that some crimes are so dark they leave a permanent stain on the air, turning a simple pint of ale into a toast with the ghosts of the past. In November 1971, over the forests of Washington state, a man stepped out of a Boeing 727 into a thunderstorm, becoming the greatest mystery in aviation history. Dan Cooper, remembered by the world as D.B. Cooper, bailed out with a parachute and $200,000 in cash, dissolving into the rainy darkness of the Pacific Northwest. He left behind nothing but 2 empty parachutes in the cabin and a legend that for decades drove treasure hunters to scour every inch of the woodland. The mystery of Cooper's Forest took physical form only 9 years later. In 1980, an 8-year-old boy playing on the banks of the Columbia River found 3 bundles of charred, decaying bills in the sand, totaling $5,800. The serial numbers matched the ransom money given to the hijacker. This discovery turned the forest from a simple search area into an anomaly zone. The money was found miles away from the projected jump zone, and experts still debate how it got there, carried by the current or buried intentionally in the river mud. The intrigue deepens because, despite the most massive search in FBI history, neither Cooper's body, nor the main bulk of the money, nor the parachute itself was ever recovered. However, the forest occasionally spits out strange fragments. Hunters and hikers have repeatedly reported finding rotted nylon cords and pieces of fabric that could be parts of a 1970s-era parachute. Each find triggers a new wave of theories. Did he survive? Did he hide the loot in the roots of ancient fir trees? Or did the forest simply swallow him whole? The climax of the D.B. Cooper saga is its absolute lack of closure.
In 2016, the FBI officially closed the case, admitting defeat to the wilderness. The forest between Portland and Ariel keeps the secret of the man who cheated the system and vanished into the void. It remains a monument to the perfect escape, where among the moss and centuries-old pines, a fortune might still be lying, waiting for someone brave enough to step deep into the woods where the sky once spat out the most mysterious criminal of the 20th century. In March 1990, while the city of Boston was still recovering from its St. Patrick's Day celebrations, two men dressed as police officers tricked their way into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. For 81 minutes, they moved with surgical precision, cutting 13 masterpieces worth over $500 million out of their frames. It remains the most expensive art theft in history. But the true enigma isn't just the missing art, it's what the museum's motion sensors recorded during the crime. The mystery deepens when you look at the digital logs from that night. According to the internal security sensors, movement was detected in galleries where the thieves were not physically located, while other rooms, where paintings were actively being ripped from the walls, remained silent on the monitors. Even more chilling is the record from the Blue Room. A sensor triggered a human presence alert just minutes before the police even entered the building. It was as if someone or something was already waiting for them in the dark. The intrigue of the Gardner Museum is now a physical experience for every visitor. Per the founder's strict will, nothing in the museum can be changed or moved. Because of this, the heavy gilded frames that once held works by Rembrandt and Vermeer still hang on the walls, completely empty. For over 3 decades, these ghost frames have served as a silent, haunting reminder of the void left behind. Despite a $10 million reward and thousands of leads, ranging from the Irish mob to international syndicates, not a single canvas has ever been recovered. The climax of this heist is the eerie stillness that now defines the museum. The thieves didn't just take art, they stole the soul of the collection, leaving behind a trail of ghost signals and empty spaces that modern forensic science cannot explain. Today, the Gardner Museum is a high-security vault from missing history, where the most valuable things in the room are the shadows inside the frames, and the only certainty is that the walls saw more than the sensors ever could. Deep in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness, the massive red buildings of the Kennecott Copper Mill rise from the mountainside like a rusted industrial cathedral. In 1938, after extracting over $200 million worth of ore, the company abruptly decided to pull the plug. The mystery of Kennecott isn't that it was abandoned, but the way it happened. This wasn't a gradual decline, it was a mass exodus in a single day. When the last train whistled and pulled away from the station, it left behind a town that looked like its inhabitants had simply blinked out of existence. The mystery lies in the eerie preservation of daily life. Because it was so remote and difficult to reach, the town became a frozen capsule of the 1930s. Explorers who reached the site decades later found breakfast dishes still sitting on kitchen tables, calendars frozen on the same month, and the massive multi-story mill filled with specialized tools and heavy machinery worth a fortune, all left to gather dust. In the hospital, surgical instruments remained laid out on trays, and the schoolhouse still had lessons written on the chalkboards. It was as if the residents expected to return within the hour, yet no one ever came back. The intrigue took a darker turn as legends of the copper ghosts began to circulate among the few brave travelers who visited the ruins. Reports of phantom footsteps on the wooden stairs of the mill and the sound of distant industrial grinding coming from deep within the empty mountain are common. Some claim to see the shadowy figures of miners still punching in for their shifts, caught in a permanent loop of labor. The town doesn't feel empty, it feels occupied by a memory so strong that the physical structures refuse to decay at a normal rate. The climax of Kennecott is the chilling realization of how quickly civilization can be erased. Today, the town stands as a silent monument to human ambition and its ultimate insignificance against the Alaskan wild. The red paint is peeling and the mountain is slowly reclaiming the timber, but the feeling of being an intruder in someone else's living room remains. Kennecott is a place where the clocks stopped, but the atmosphere continues to tick. A ghost town where the silence is so heavy you can almost hear the ghost of the last train leaving forever.
On a gray morning in August 1994, the residents of Oakville, Washington expected a typical Pacific Northwest drizzle. Instead, they witnessed something that defies every law of nature. For 3 weeks, a strange translucent substance, jelly-like blobs about the size of a grain of rice, fell from the sky over a 20-square-mile area. This wasn't hail or snow, it was a biological rain that brought with it a wave of mysterious illness and a puzzle that scientists still haven't solved. The mystery deepened when the local community began to collapse under a sudden medical crisis. Almost everyone who touched the substance developed severe flu-like symptoms, respiratory infections, and intense vertigo that lasted for weeks. Even the town's animals weren't spared. Many pets died shortly after the rain fell. Disturbed by the phenomenon, a local resident took a sample of the blobs to a laboratory. The results were chilling. The translucent goo contained 2 species of bacteria, but more shockingly, it contained intact human white blood cells. The intrigue behind the Oakville Blobs points to a dark, man-made origin. Theories quickly spread that the military was conducting secret biological testing, or that the blobs were the result of a mid-air waste dump from a commercial airliner. However, the FAA debunked the waste theory, noting that airplane waste is dyed blue and follows a different freezing pattern. If the substance contained human cells, it meant the rain was biological in nature. To this day, the records of the exact bacterial strains remain classified or lost, and no government agency has ever taken responsibility for the gelatinous storm. The climax of the Oakville incident is the unsettling silence that followed the sample's disappearance. After initial testing by the Washington State Department of Health, the samples mysteriously vanished before a more rigorous DNA analysis could be performed. Oakville returned to being a quiet town, but the memory of those 3 weeks remains a jagged scar in the minds of the residents. It stands as a reminder that sometimes the sky doesn't just hold the weather, it holds secrets that can descend without warning, leaving behind a biological footprint that we were never meant to understand.
On June 24, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying near the Cascade Mountains, searching for a downed military transport plane. The sky was crystal clear, but what he saw near Mount Rainier would change human culture forever. 9 brilliant crescent-shaped objects appeared in the distance, weaving through the mountain peaks at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. In that moment, the modern age of the UFO was born. Not from a science fiction novel, but from the cockpit of a terrified witness. The mystery lies in the physics of the encounter. Arnold, an experienced pilot, timed the objects as they moved between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. His calculations suggested they were traveling at over 1,200 miles per hour, 3 times faster than any aircraft in existence at the time. When he described their movement to reporters, he said they flew like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. A journalist misinterpreted his words, coining the term flying saucer, and the world suddenly became obsessed with the possibility that we were being watched from above. The intrigue stems from the immediate and high-level military reaction. Arnold wasn't a conspiracy theorist, he was a respected businessman and aviator.
The Air Force launched a massive investigation, but they couldn't explain how 9 metallic objects could perform high-G maneuvers without wings or visible propulsion. As Arnold tried to make sense of his experience, he began to feel the weight of his discovery. He famously remarked that if the government didn't know what they were, then things were a lot more serious than I realized. The climax of the Arnold sighting is the chain reaction it triggered. Within weeks of his report, hundreds of similar sightings flooded in from across the globe, including the infamous Roswell incident just days later. Kenneth Arnold's afternoon flight over the Cascades ripped a hole in our understanding of the sky. To this day, the 9 specks of light remain unexplained, serving as the definitive starting point for a mystery that has lasted nearly a century. The moment we realized that our skies might be occupied by something far more advanced than ourselves.
For decades, teenagers and truckers driving down Route 151 in Pennsylvania whispered about a figure that haunted the dark shoulders of the highway. They called him the Green Man, or Charlie No-Face. According to the legend, he was a glowing, radioactive monster who wandered the night, his face melted away into a smooth, featureless mask. But the true mystery isn't a ghost story. It's the fact that the Green Man was entirely real, a living shadow produced by a horrific accident and a lifetime of isolation. The mystery of Charlie No-Face began in 1919 with a young boy named Raymond Robinson. While trying to view a bird's nest on a high-voltage trolley bridge, Raymond was struck by thousands of volts of electricity. He survived, but the surge literally melted his face, leaving him without eyes, a nose, or a right arm. Shunned by a society that couldn't bear to look at him, Raymond spent his days in hiding, but at night he would emerge to walk for miles along the quiet country roads, his pale skin reflecting the moonlight in a way that looked sickly and green to passing motorists. The intrigue lies in the collision between the man and the myth. As the decades passed, Raymond became a local legend. People would drive out to Route 151 specifically to find him. Some were cruel, shouting insults or throwing things, but others would stop to bring him cigarettes and beer, chatting with the monster in the dark. Raymond never spoke much, but his presence was a constant, haunting fixture of the Pennsylvania night. To those who didn't know his story, he was a supernatural entity. To those who did, he was a heartbreaking reminder of human resilience and the cruelty of shadows. The climax of the Green Man's story is the silence he left behind when he died in 1985. The walks stopped, but the sightings didn't. To this day, drivers on Route 151 claim to see a featureless figure standing just outside the reach of their headlights, or hear the rhythmic tapping of a walking stick on the pavement. Raymond Robinson passed away, but the Green Man became immortal, an urban legend born from a man who just wanted to walk in the only time of day when the world couldn't see his pain. Late on the night of October 4, 1967, the residents of a small fishing village in Nova Scotia witnessed something that the Canadian government still classifies as unsolved. It wasn't a trick of the light or a distant star. Multiple witnesses reported a low-flying object, over 60 feet long, illuminated by 4 flashing lights, screaming across the sky before crashing into the freezing waters of Shag Harbor with a massive boom. Local fishermen and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, rushed to the scene expecting to save survivors of a plane crash, but what they found defied every standard emergency protocol. The mystery deepened the moment the rescuers reached the impact site. Instead of debris, oil slicks, or bodies, they found a thick, glittering yellow foam spreading across the waves. Witnesses reported seeing the object floating on the water, its lights still pulsing, before it slowly began to submerge. Despite a massive search effort involving the Canadian Coast Guard and Navy divers, no wreckage was ever recovered. The object hadn't shattered upon impact. It had seemingly entered the ocean intact and continued its journey beneath the waves.
The intrigue took a high-stakes military turn in the days following the event. While the public search was eventually called off, internal documents later revealed that the military had tracked the object using underwater sonar. According to some reports, the craft traveled over 25 miles underwater to a nearby submarine base at Shelburne, where it was joined by a second unidentified object. Navy divers allegedly watched as the two craft repaired each other before both shot out of the water at impossible speeds, vanishing into the atmosphere. The climax of the Shag Harbor incident is its official status. Unlike the Roswell crash or other famous UFO cases, the Canadian authorities never tried to explain this away as a weather balloon or a secret aircraft. To this day, the RCMP and the Department of National Defense files list the event as a UFO crash, making it one of the rare instances where a government formally acknowledges that something unknown and highly advanced fell from the sky and vanished into the depths of our own oceans. In the late summer of 1951, the sky over Lubbock, Texas, became a stage for a mystery that challenged the logic of some of the brightest minds in the state. On the night of August 25th, 3 professors from Texas Technological College were sitting in a backyard enjoying the warm evening when they saw a formation of roughly 20 to 30 luminous blue-green lights racing silently overhead in a perfect V shape. Unlike the blurry accounts of laypeople, this sighting was reported by highly trained scientists who immediately began calculating speed, altitude, and trajectory. The mystery deepened a few nights later when a 19-year-old student named Carl Hart Jr. looked out his bedroom window and saw the same formation returning. Armed with a Kodak camera, he managed to snap 5 of the most famous photographs in UFO history. The images showed a precise, glowing V formation of lights that looked like a squadron from the future. When the professors analyzed the data, they estimated that if the objects were at a standard aircraft altitude, they were moving at over 600 miles per hour, at a time when silence at such speeds was physically impossible for human technology. The intrigue surrounding the Lubbock lights led to one of the first major investigations by the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book. Investigators were desperate to find a natural explanation, eventually proposing that the lights were actually the reflective white bellies of plover birds, illuminated by the city's new mercury vapor streetlights. However, the professors rejected this theory, pointing out that birds cannot fly at several hundred miles per hour, nor do they maintain a mathematically perfect formation with such rigid precision. The Air Force ultimately labeled the case unidentified, admitting they couldn't explain what the scientists and the camera had captured. The climax of the Lubbock incident is the lingering question of the ghost behind the lights. To this day, the Carl Hart photos remain some of the most analyzed and least debunked pieces of evidence in existence. The Lubbock lights weren't just a fleeting glance, they were a persistent, calculated display of technology that left a group of skeptical professors staring at the stars in disbelief. It serves as a reminder that even when science is watching, the universe still keeps secrets that refuse to be measured.
On the evening of March 13, 1997, the state of Arizona witnessed the most massive and documented mass sighting in modern history. It wasn't a grainy photo or a lone witness in the desert. It was a parade of light watched by thousands of people, including pilots, police officers, and even the state's governor. For several hours, a series of optical phenomena moved across the sky, but the centerpiece of the night was a silent, solid, V-shaped craft so enormous that witnesses described it as a city in the sky. The mystery lies in the staggering scale of the object. As it drifted slowly over the city of Phoenix, observers noted that it was large enough to blot out the stars as it passed overhead. Estimates put the craft at over a mile wide. It moved at a leisurely pace, cruising at low altitude without making a sound, a feat of aerodynamics that remains impossible for any known aircraft of that size.
People stood in their backyards and on highways, watching in stunned silence as the giant structure glided toward the Mexican border, its 5 massive orbs of light glowing with a steady, eerie intensity. The intrigue took a political turn when the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, held a press conference to address the growing panic. In an attempt to mock the situation, he had an aide dress up in an alien costume, telling the public they had caught the culprit. However, years later, after leaving office, Symington made a shocking admission. He had actually seen the craft himself and described it as enormous and inexplicably otherworldly. He confessed that he had only mocked the event to prevent public hysteria, admitting that the military could provide no answers about what had invaded their airspace. The climax of the Phoenix Lights is the enduring divide between the official explanation and the lived experience of the witnesses. The Air Force eventually claimed the lights were flares dropped during a training exercise, but this failed to explain the solid triangular hull that blocked out the constellations for thousands of residents. To this day, the Phoenix Lights remain the gold standard for mass sightings, a night when the residents of a major American city looked up and saw with undeniable clarity that the sky no longer belonged to them alone. In the late 1970s and throughout 1987, a strange phenomenon began to infiltrate the domestic peace of Bristol, England. It wasn't a loud noise, but a persistent, low-frequency thrumming, similar to a distant diesel engine idling or a heavy electrical transformer. While many heard nothing at all, a significant portion of the population, roughly 800 people at its peak, began to suffer. This was the Bristol hum, a sound that didn't just exist in the air, it vibrated through the bones of those sensitive enough to hear it. The mystery of the hum is its selective nature and its devastating impact on health. For those affected, the sound was maddeningly inescapable. It was louder indoors than outdoors and was most intense at night when the rest of the world went quiet. Residents reported chronic insomnia, severe headaches, nosebleeds, and a sense of mounting anxiety. One sufferer described it as a torture that never ends, leading some to move away from the city entirely just to find a night of silence. Despite dozens of theories, no single source, industrial, geological, or atmospheric, could ever be pinned down. The intrigue grew as local authorities and scientists attempted to track the source. Teams of acoustic engineers scoured Bristol with sensitive microphones, but the results were baffling. In many cases, the machines recorded nothing, even while residents stood next to them, insisting the noise was deafening. This led to theories that the hum might be a form of tinnitus or a psychological reaction, but that didn't explain why groups of unrelated people in specific neighborhoods all started hearing the exact same frequency at the exact same time. Others pointed towards secret government experiments in long-wave radio or the Hertzian waves used for submarine communication. The climax of the Bristol hum is the unsettling reality that it never truly went away, it just shifted. While the 1987 outbreak eventually faded, similar hums began appearing in Taos, New Mexico and Windsor, Ontario. To this day, the sound remains a phantom of the modern world. It serves as a reminder that our environment is filled with invisible, audible forces that we have created but cannot control. For the people of Bristol, the silence of the night is never guaranteed. It is merely a thin veil over a vibration that could return at any moment. In late December 1980, near the twin NATO air bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge in England, something bypassed the world's most sophisticated radar systems. For 2 consecutive nights, high-ranking U.S. Air Force personnel witnessed a triangular metallic craft maneuvering through the trees of Rendlesham Forest. This wasn't a distant light in the sky. This was a physical encounter involving military security patrols who walked right up to a glowing object that seemed to distort the very fabric of the forest. The mystery centers on Sergeant Jim Peniston, who approached the craft on the first night. He described a smooth black glass-like surface covered in strange hieroglyphic symbols. When he touched the symbols, he claimed a telepathic stream of binary code filled his mind. Decades later, when that code was finally transcribed and translated, it revealed a list of coordinates pointing to ancient historical sites around the globe, including Giza and Nazca, followed by a cryptic message, "Exploration of humanity continued." The intrigue is solidified by the HALT memo, an official document written by Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. In the memo and subsequent audio recordings made during the second night of the sighting, Halt describes seeing a red sun-like object through the trees that eventually broke into 5 white objects and then hovered over the airbase, shining laser-like beams down into the nuclear weapons storage bunkers. The radiation levels at the landing site were later measured and found to be significantly higher than the natural background, leaving physical proof of the craft's presence. The climax of the Rendlesham mystery is the wall of silence that fell over the bases afterward. Personnel were allegedly debriefed with extreme secrecy, and some were told that the incident never happened. Yet the combined testimony of dozens of trained military observers makes it impossible to dismiss as a lighthouse reflection or a prank. Rendlesham stands as a chilling reminder that even the world's most secure nuclear sites are vulnerable to visitors who operate outside our understanding of time and technology, leaving behind nothing but a string of zeros and ones and a forest that still feels wrong to those who enter it.
1948. High in the rugged Sandia Mountains of New Mexico, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon a site that threatened to rewrite the timeline of human history. Inside a series of deep, cramped limestone caves, they found something impossible: the remains of giant ground sloths, animals that were supposed to have been extinct for thousands of years, buried alongside evidence of controlled fire. These weren't just surface dwellings, these were sealed environments, where the scent of ancient smoke seemed to linger in the cold, still air. The mystery lies in the depth and the isolation of the finds. Deep within the dark zones of the caves, investigators found hearths, rings of fire-scorched earth containing the charred bones of these prehistoric megafauna. The stratification suggested that humans were living in these lightless tunnels and cooking massive beasts long before the Clovis people, who were previously thought to be the first inhabitants of the Americas. Skeptics argued over the dating, but the physical evidence was undeniable. Someone had dragged giant, multi-ton sloths into the bowels of the earth to feast in the dark. The intrigue grew as the Sandia Man theory took hold. Tools found in the cave, unique leaf-shaped spear points, didn't match any known culture. Even more baffling was the realization that some of the cave entrances appeared to have been intentionally sealed from the inside, as if the inhabitants were trying to hide from something on the surface, or perhaps keep something trapped within the mountain. As the decades passed, the original excavation notes became a subject of intense academic controversy, with claims of suppressed evidence and manipulated dates surfacing to protect established archaeological dogmas. The climax of the Sandia Caves mystery is the haunting atmosphere that remains in the tunnels today. To stand in the belly of the mountain is to realize that the history of the Americas is far older and stranger than the textbooks suggest. It is a place where the shadows of giant beasts and the flickering light of ancient fires meet. The sealed caves serve as a silent reminder that beneath our feet lie the remains of a lost era, a time when humans and giants shared the darkness of the earth, leaving behind only bones and ashes for us to find.
In 1991, across the sprawling plains of Montana, residents began reporting a sound that seemed to signal the end of the world. It wasn't a mechanical hum or the rumble of distant thunder. It was a deep, metallic, rhythmic blaring that resembled massive trumpets or a cello being dragged across a metal floor. These sounds didn't come from the ground or the mountains. They descended directly from the clouds, filling the entire horizon. While skyquakes had been heard for centuries, the Montana event was different. For the first time, it was clear, prolonged, and captured on tape. The mystery of the Sky Trumpets lies in their sheer scale and the absence of a source. In one documented instance, the sound lasted for several minutes, echoing over hundreds of square miles. There were no low-flying aircraft, no seismic activity in the area, and no industrial projects that could produce a noise of such staggering volume. Meteorological experts were baffled, as the sounds occurred even in perfectly clear weather. People described a feeling of vibrational dread as the low frequencies were felt in the chest long before they were processed by the ears. The intrigue grew as the phenomenon went global. Since the early 1990s, the trumpets have been recorded from the forests of British Columbia to the streets of Kiev. Scientists have proposed numerous theories: solar flares interacting with the Earth's magnetic field, high-pressure gas escaping from the crust, or acoustic gravity waves generated by the upper atmosphere. However, none of these theories explain the distinctly musical and metallic quality of the sounds. For many, the biological reaction, intense anxiety, and the instinct to hide suggests that our ancestors may have heard these sounds and associated them with divine warnings or cataclysmic shifts in the planet's core. The climax of the Sky Trumpets is the realization that the Earth itself might be screaming. Whether it is a byproduct of a shifting magnetic pole or secret atmospheric testing like the controversial HARP project, the sounds remind us that the sky is not a silent void. The Montana recordings remain a chilling auditory testament to a world we don't fully understand. To hear the trumpets is to experience a moment of cosmic insignificance, a sound so vast and alien that it turns the sky into a massive, haunting instrument, playing a song with no known composer.
History preserves the memory of great achievements, but it is also full of names of those who vanished without a trace within its labyrinths. Perhaps the answers to these mysteries are still hidden somewhere close by. If you appreciate these explorations of history's forgotten pages, please like and subscribe to Mr. Imahara. Let us know in the comments which of these events made you think the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.